So the constraint demo that I'm going to go to today is specifically how to have a character grab a doorknob, turn it, and open the door. Now, at first, this might seem pretty simple, but depending on how you're animating the character grabbing the door, this can be quite tricky because there's going to be a lot of specific animation that we need to get through here. So let me just share my desktop here. This is a quick scene that I set up. We've got a door and we've got a character holding onto the door. Yay. Now, as the character opens this door, what we need to have happen is I'm using a handle here instead of a doorknob. Basically the same thing, just different elements that we're going to have to choose from. But let's say I have this setup. I need this character to rotate the doorknob down. The hand needs to follow. They need to push the door open. Okay, that's simple enough. Just a straight constraint will help here. But what if we need to add extra layers in here? So this character is going to try and pull on the door. Maybe the door is locked, so they'll turn the doorknob, like we have here, and then they're going to pull or push, whichever one we want, and they need to adjust their hand on that doorknob. So they need to be able to pull down. So let's say you have your lever right there. They grab on. They need to be able to pull down, turn it, and then as they pull, we need to grab on and let the fingers pull away. So they're kind of pulling like that from the fingertips. So they start from here and then pull, and they're pulling and pulling and pulling, and it's just like right on the fingertips there. How do we do that? Essentially, we need a pivot that is animatable and the ability to move the hand while it's constrained to the door. Now, the big thing is we do need to constrain the hand to the door in this case. I can't constrain the door to the hand or else that's going to be a whole nightmare. It's just going to tear the door right off of its hinges. So we need a constraint setup that allows the hand to follow the door, but also allows us to manipulate the hand and change where it's pivoting from. The other reason a constraint is important here, or some sort of adjustable pivot, is that by default, if I was to just try to animate the wrist and go, I don't need any constraints, I'm just going to do it by hand, brute force it. Okay. Let's say I need to rotate the doorknob. I'll rotate the doorknob here, right there. Now I have to move the hand and I need to translate it. And then, oh, dang it, my rotation's in the wrong place. So now I have to pull this over this way. Oh, got to get it back into place. Put it there. Make sure the fingers, oh, dang it, they're cutting through. Okay, pull it there. Got to rotate this back. You can see it's a nightmare. And this is one little move. I haven't even done the rotation downwards this way and everything else that goes along with it. And then we have to get to the pull and all of that. And then the door opening. There's a lot of things in here that if we don't have a constraint, we might just be dealing with a lot of headache that we don't really need or want to have to deal with. Now, with all of that said, if you have something like Animbot, you can use the temporary pivots in Animbot. That's really nice. The temporary pivots will allow you to essentially constrain, lock that hand to the doorknob, do a whole bunch of stuff, done. Very nice, very simple. Sometimes we don't have Animbot. If you're working on your own project and you don't have the plugin, if you're working at a studio and they don't allow you to install the plugin, there will be many times where we might need to set something up like this. Or we have a very complex scene where you want to essentially create this constraint setup so that you don't always have to keep using the temporary pivot and resetting it and kind of adjusting it all the time. If you've got multiple characters, like let's say a character opening a bunch of drawers or opening a bunch of doors, it can be very tedious to try and keep resetting that all the time depending on how the shot is set up. So sometimes a constraint setup is going to be helpful. How do we set this up? Well, there's many layers in this, in the sense that we could go really complex with this. We can put more and more layers and details and constraints in order to get all the physicality. And I could set up a constraint setup where I have a pivot point on this side of the hand, on that side of the hand, at the fingers, at the palm. I can do all sorts of things. But let's keep it fairly simple here. The main goal, I really like this song. I know it's kind of not the best streaming music because it's got lyrics, but every time I go through the music to like clear things out, it's like, maybe I should get rid of this because maybe something more instrumental will be helpful. It's like, oh, but I really love it. My own hubris. So, back on topic. I want to have a constraint setup that's simple, but allows me to adjust the pivot point of the hand. That's the key element here. So that I can still rotate it around the handle, around this point here. That's the pivot point that I need. And then I also need an offset so that I can rotate the hand maybe from the fingers, maybe from the palm, maybe for some reason he's just washed his hands and he's going to open the door with his wrist and he just pushes it open with the wrist there. I want to be able to adjust that wherever I need it to be. So, how do we do that? Well, the first thing we don't want to do is we don't want to do a straight constraint. A straight constraint is always going to lock you down, and as an animator, it's essentially shooting ourselves in the foot. So if I take this door handle here, take the hand, and I'm just going to go to constrain, parent, and just going to add that. Boop. There we go. Technically, that now works. You can see. But I cannot animate this hand. It's going to look like I can move it here, like that. But the moment that something changes, so if I start this, boop, it snaps right back into place because a constraint is just that. It is a constraint. It constrains things, doesn't allow them to move. I want something that allows me to keep animating the hand. So what we need to do is create a locator hierarchy. A locator hierarchy is essentially going to allow us to get the best of constraints and parenting. Parenting in Maya is having objects follow each other while still retaining some element of freedom where they can still be animated on their own. So, to set this up, essentially what I need first is a controller for the wrist, a new controller for the wrist. This will allow me to constrain the wrist to something so it follows along and have that thing that I constrain it to be animatable. Now, for me, I like to use locators for this. It's just nice and clean, and it's something I can select very easily. So let's... And hey, thank you so much for the sub. Aw, Blaze, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And Chris, yes, I love locators as well. Locators are one of my favorite little things. They are super helpful. So I've got a locator here, and this is going to be my wrist loc. So I always put LOC for my locators just to keep the names consistent. So this is going to be the thing that controls the wrist. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to place it right here at the wrist. Now the easy way to do that is select your locator, select the wrist, go to modify, match transformations. I'm just going to match that. Boop. Right there. It's in place. So that's pretty much ready to go. Okay. I'm not going to set up any constraints yet, but this is going to be our locator that controls the wrist. Now, let's create another locator. Locator, create, boop, right there. Scale this up. Now you'll notice I'm using the input or the shape scale here. The reason I'm doing that is so that the main scale here stays at a value of 1 and is just a little easier to work with like that. So this locator is going to essentially be the thing that controls the pivot point. So this is going to be my pivot point locator. So I'm just going to call it pivot. loc. So essentially this is going to be what I place right here in the door handle. Right there. And let's go into wireframe. Is it? Okay, there's not really a face here, so I'm going to snap it right to that point on the door handle. That should be close to the center. I'm not going to worry about being perfect for this. And I'm going to place it right there. So this locator is going to be right there in the door handle. And as I move that, and hey, Chris, thank you so much for the sub, or Blaze, thank you so much for the gift. Oh, and Chris, welcome to the subs. Thank you so much. That's really generous, Blaze. So this locator here is going to be the thing that I use to animate the rotation so that the hand follows along. Great. So with this, we essentially have a very basic setup here that we could use to get everything working. What I would do, and let's actually just set this up here. So this is going to be the most basic setup that we can use here. I'm going to take my wrist and constrain it to the locator. So you select the locator first, the object that leads, then the object that follows. So locator, then wrist, constrain, parent. There we go. That locator is now going to lead the wrist. Now I can take that locator and I'm going to parent it to the locator right here. So what that does is if I just parent it, so I can just middle mouse drag the wrist locator onto the pivot locator here. You can see now it's a child. It's underneath the hierarchy there. What this allows me to do is rotate the pivot locator. Boop. And you'll notice I'm twisting the wrist a little too far, which I'm breaking the wrist right there. I need to twist his arm back into place. But you can see right there, I can now rotate that hand around that handle, nice and easy. Perfect. So at its core, this is all I would need. And then, hey, Animated Paul, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the sub. Aw, geez, 34 months. Jeez, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Also, hello, it's been a while. Hope you're doing well. So we've got this setup here, and that's technically all we would need for a basic setup. At this point, I just need to get the locator to follow the door, because if I open the door or move the handle itself, they're not connected yet. Right there. So how do I get this locator to follow along? Well, there's a few different ways I can do it. I don't want to constrain it, because if I constrain it, then it's not going to be able to be animatable. It's just going to lock it down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it to a group. So I'm just going to take this and hit Control G to add a group here. And a group is just going to add a top level node over top of this. Technically, I could also just put another locator and parent that underneath. The reason I'm using a group is I don't need to actually physically select this. I don't need it to be visible in my scene. So a group is just an empty object. It's just there. So I can use that instead. It's up to you. I know some animators prefer groups, others prefer locators, whichever works best for you. Honestly, you could even use a piece of geometry if you wanted to, a polygon cube. It's really just getting that extra level of hierarchy in there. From there, I'm going to take this group and constrain it to the doorknob. So I'm going to select the doorknob here, select the group, constrain parent, like so. So now the group is going to follow the door. So if I open the door here, the group is the thing that's following. Because the pivot locator is following the group, I can now rotate this at any time. So I could just do that, and then maybe I'll add a little bit of door open and turn the handle. And then, oh, wait, maybe I want to rotate that hand a little bit. Boop. There we go. Maybe a little twist right there. Done. And then at any time, I can still animate the wrist by moving this. So I could actually have him push down with his knuckles right here. And everything still follows along. Right there. Great. That's perfect. So honestly, that's really all I need. I've got a way to push this and rotate this at any point, and I can just offset this to change how he pushes the door handle. So if I wanted to, I could just kind of have him extend his finger like that. Bip. He's gonna push down with his finger, and then there we go. Done. And if I need to rotate that a little bit, there we go. Just sticks onto the door. And I can just tweak that however I want. Like that. Like that. So that's the most basic setup that you really need. Now, you could add extra layers in here. What would those extra layers do? Essentially give you different ways of offsetting things. In this case, I don't really need that, because this basic setup is really, it gives me everything. And for most door openings, you're not going to be doing a ton of changing positions and like bouncing the hand from one pivot point to the next. It's going to hold a pose, and at most it might stretch a little bit. So it starts, my glove always hides things. It holds like this, and then maybe it stretches like that. So your pivot point is going to be in the palm and then over to the fingers. Well, I can easily just animate that by moving this control and sliding it back. So it starts at the palm, slides back, and my pivot point is always going to be right in the door handle, right there. So let's actually rename this. The group, we'll call this door follow. And for groups, I always add GRP at the end, just to keep the naming convention in there. Technically, you can just look at the icons in front of them to see what they are. But if ever I need to look at a list and I don't have those icons, it just keeps that nice and clean. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It actually went faster than I thought. So yes, it's just creating a very basic constraint setup, and you now have a way to animate that hand using this locator without having to deal with a whole complex setup. Now, something that I didn't do, which I saw someone mention here, is do you delete history and freeze transform before constraining? Now you can see I did not. The reason I didn't was just to show that you could do it without deleting the history and transforms. You don't have to, but there is negatives to that, and it's usually always better to delete your history and to freeze your transformations before you start doing a bunch of constraints. One of the big reasons you would want to do that is, let's say I've got this this locator right here in place. It's right at the doorknob, right in the center, perfect. And then I accidentally go, whoops, oops, I moved it. Let's reset it back into position so I get right back in the door. Oops, I can't reset it. So I'm always having to be very careful. Don't move that. Gotta remember this position. Gotta lock it down. It is not fun. So instead, we want to make a system that allows us to easily reset things if we need to. So for example, with this locator, what I would want to do is kind of get it in that first position. Let's actually reset the door here. And then I would want to freeze the transformations. Freezing the transformations essentially sets the translates and rotates back to 0 in this new position. Now, because I have everything parented and grouped and constrained, it probably won't work. Let's see. Yeah, see, it did reset it, but see how it moved the hand here and twisted it? That's because I already set up this whole parenting system. Now I could reset it here and put that back into place, but ideally you should kind of get everything in position, freeze your transformations, and then put it in. Now, freezing transformations is only for the the locators and groups and anything like that, you don't want to freeze the transformations on a rig, because the rig is already rigged. It's set up a certain way. If you freeze the transformations, you might just mess things up. Ideally, if you've referenced it, it shouldn't do anything. So yeah, there you go. And now if I ever accidentally go, oops, I can just go in here, zero that out, right back into place. So yes, it's very important to do that. It's not always necessary, but it is going to save you headaches. Another issue that you might have is that if you don't freeze your transformations, you can start to get some weird deformations to things. So I'm trying to remember a setup that'll definitely get me some deformations. So I've got these two objects. They've both been scaled. Let's actually scale this one a little differently. And then I'm going to constrain one to the other. And let's see if this will do it. No. Let's see. Parent. Let's see. Essentially, if you're not careful and you create a hierarchy and constraint setup, what can end up happening is the child object, as you're rotating it, is going to start to deform and stretch in weird ways. And for some reason, my brain is not, well, for some reason, it's because I haven't slept. My brain is not letting me remember the setup that would allow you to do that. But it's essentially, if you do a setup similar to this, you can get some really weird results, especially if you've got scales in place. So resetting those or freezing those transforms, very important in that case.